Welcome to Fueled by Impact, a show for progressive leaders and creators. Now, if you think that you knew a thing or two about coffee, think again, my friend. My guest today is a former barista champion. He's also a YouTuber / content creator. He is a podcast host, and he is the co-founder of one of the coolest coffee businesses on the planet, Cat and Cloud. I am extremely lucky to have this guest on the show today for a couple of reasons. First, he and his whole team at Cat and Cloud are living examples of what a truly progressive business can be. And there is so much that you can learn from them, and we dive into all different aspects of what it means to lead and to pave the way for such a refreshing way of having an impact in the world. Second reason, my guest had a direct impact on me personally without even realizing it. His message and the work that he and his friends, they are part of the reason that I made the leap to pursue my current path. So without further ado, I bring you my conversation with the one, the only Chris Baca. Thank you so much for being here on the show. I really appreciate having you.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
If you could maybe just kick off and give people a quick background on who you are and what you're up to.
Right. So my name's Chris Baca, and I'm a co-owner of Cat and Cloud Coffee. So we're a mission-based coffee roasting company in Santa Cruz. We've got 4 cafes. We roast coffee for wholesale. We sell online, all of the usual channels. And our business is really a conduit for our larger mission, which is to inspire connection by creating memorable experiences. I have 2 other business partners, Jared, who's been one of my best friends since I started this weird, crazy world of specialty coffee that I'm in, and Charles, who Jared and I both met later from the complete opposite end of the coffee world. So Jared and I come from the barista world, and Charles has a Wall Street background, but he got into coffee through the green coffee world. So he worked in South Sudan, Ethiopia for different NGOs, setting up coffee washing stations. And the 3 of us had a bunch of different coffee jobs and really passionate about the industry, but we always had this problem, which is we felt things could be better. And it was really hard to articulate what better was. Better was a lot of different things. Better was better product, better coffee, but better also spoke to us in a cultural way. Going to work could be better. Clocking in somewhere and spending 8 hours could be more exciting. It could be more engaging. It could give you more. So Cat and Cloud is really a manifestation of 10 years plus of conversations about what would we do if we did our own thing. And that's what we're doing. And it's really, really interesting. It's funny how a lot of the ideas that you think would be relatively simple to execute and why aren't we doing this now are incredibly challenging when you're the one who's responsible for getting the ball rolling on them.
Right.
The business has been both a platform for us to help grow other people, but just a huge conduit for accelerated growth for ourselves. I've learned more in the past 5 years, man, than I probably ever have in this capacity. So that's what we're up to every day, is just actively pursuing better on that to, close the gap between our vision and what our reality is for us and the people around us.
One of the things that struck me so much is just you guys, you're so thoughtful about everything in terms of why you're doing something, the way that you're approaching it. And I think that's something that was really refreshing for me to hear, especially so early in the journey of starting up the business. And so there's like a bunch of topics that I want to dive into around that. Before that though, Cat and Cloud. So where does the name come from?
So in 2010, before we ever conceptualized opening a business, Jared and I were working together, and our really good friend, Julia, she owns a coffee roasting company in Santa Barbara called Dune. And when she had first opened her business, I met her because I was the tech who installed their espresso machine while I was working for another company, and we just hit it off. It was amazing. She's got some of the best energy ever. She is, I don't necessarily believe in the idea of a muse, but if I had a muse, it would be her. She does all these crazy whimsical things. And one of the whimsical things that she did was I'm having an art show in the cafe. It's going to be the Chris Baca art show. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be about you and Jared, and I'm going to put it up. So she takes blank printer paper and a black Sharpie, and she draws all of these different little doodles of me with Jared, just different scenes going on. And in some of them, we were coffee brewing equipment. So there's one where I'm a portafilter and he's a grinder. There's one where we're sea creatures. I'm a lobster and he's some octopus or something like that. And then one of the doodles that she came up with was the cat and cloud, what we now use as our logo. And we saw that, and I was like, that's really cool. We both immediately liked it. We had no idea why. So I'm the cat and Jared is the cloud. And if you look really closely at the logo, it's super funny because you'll notice the original version of the logo, the cloud has these big hoop earrings because Jared used to have these gauged ears with these big hoop rings. When I first met him, he doesn't have them anymore. But Julia drew those in there. We just thought it was really cool. So we adopted that cat and cloud logo and started using it in this blog that we were writing. So I'd been writing about coffee since probably 2004, before I ever got my first big coffee job. I've always loved expressing the thoughts that I have in my head. It helps me distill them. And then when Jared and I started working together, we kind of collabed on this blog. So we would do things poking fun at the industry or just giving really challenging common perspectives. So we started using that cat and cloud logo for the blog. And we didn't have the cat and cloud name. We didn't think about it like that. We called the blog True Baca because Truby is his last name and Baca is my last name. So it was just super convenient, smashed it up and had this Wookiee-like name. When it came time for the business, it's like, man, we can't use that name. That's super corny. That doesn't even make sense. And we were completely stressed out, coming up with the most ridiculous names and trying to push them through. We'd brainstorm for hours and then we'd send all these names to Charles. And he's like, no, that's stupid. No, it's dumb. It's just not. He was really passionate about having something that was emotionally resonant, something that elicited this emotion. He's like, it's just not hitting. So one day my wife was sitting around when we were brainstorming and she's all, why don't you just call it Cat and Cloud? You have this logo that you've been using forever. You could just call it Cat and Cloud and use the logo. And it just totally stuck. That was it.
That's great. Well, so you talked a little bit about, so you guys are mission driven. Fill me in a little bit on what does that mean to you, and even unpack a little bit all the thought that you guys have put into, what you just said about, and I'll mess it up, but around inspiring connection. What does that mean? How did you arrive at that? Talk to me about that a little bit more.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So when we were starting out, we always knew that there was more power that each individual person had than simply this transactional relationship with work, right? Work for a lot of people is, hey, you show up and you make coffee for people, and then I'll give you minimum wage, or you do job X and I'll pay you this. And that's where the story or the journey ends. That's where the opportunity ends. But for both of us, we're incredibly attracted to the energy that came along with working in the cafe. And I'm going to use the coffee shop for most of my examples, just because that's where we come from. But all of these things are applicable no matter where you are, what your work is. You can just, tweak it to fit your situation. So in any job, you've got these set of things that you have to do that are the job. But within that, you've got this really crazy opportunity to create experiences for people that they can carry with them for the rest of their day. And it's this amazing thing where, if let's say you work at a coffee shop, you get to work 5:30 in the morning, really early, you dial in, you get everything set up. People get up, they shower, they get dressed, and they head out for work. And on their way to work, they stop at the coffee shop, which means that at any given time, you're probably the first interaction with that human that they've had outside of their family unit. You're the first person that they're going to come in contact with.
Right,
and because of that, you've got the opportunity to set up their day. And how you approach that guest service interaction can leave someone feeling awesome. This is great. Not just awesome in the moment, but carrying that energy through the rest of the day. Or you have the opportunity to, set their day up for something that's really crappy with that subpar, unintentional, just unengaged service. And these are things that we realized early on that were just kind of intuitive to us. We didn't have any training on guest experience or service or anything like that. It was just kind of this feeling that if we're here, we should do the best that we can to make the person on the other side of the counter smile, have a good time. It's not just coming to get coffee. It's coming to have a party. And those simple experiences compounded over time can actually change a person's life. I know when this was the weirdest thing. I went to the ER, I guess a couple of weeks ago now. I was having some health things, but I had the worst experience in the ER ever. It was terrible. It's funny because I go in the hospital, I'm sitting in the waiting room after they triage me, and they have this mission on the wall that's compassionate care. What was it? Human focused care, some snippet of their mission. So I'm like, oh, they have a mission too. That's cool. And I open up my phone and I'm scrolling through their website while I'm waiting. And, they have a mission, they have values, they have all these things. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. They took me back into the room and I'm waiting. And the physician's assistant who is walking around, all these rooms open up to this common area. And the physician's assistant's like, man, I just don't want to be here today. I'm just having the worst day ever. This is not just from earshot of me, but everybody else who's in a room waiting to be worked on. And they're like, man, I wish I could just, maybe they'll let me go home, 5 hours early. I'm not feeling it. I was like, wow, this is kind of crazy. So I had an infection in my foot, and about 3 minutes later, that was the person who came in with a scalpel and scissors to kind of cut into my skin to, drain everything and figure it out. And I was, oh, wow, someone's going to cut into my body who doesn't want to be at work today. They're not in their right state of mind, and they're not shy about saying that in the open air. So I'm already nervous, and I just decided to lean in a little bit. And I'm like, so you think they're going to let you go home early? Think they're going to get that 5 hours early? At the end of my visit, the nurse comes in to start the IV, and I'm going to go do a scan or whatever. And she comes in and she's real friendly and she's making small talk. She's like, where do you work? And I was like, oh, I own a coffee roasting company. She's like, oh, which one? I was like, Kavanagh. She's like, oh, wow. So I used to live around the corner from Portola, which is our original shop. And she says, this might be real weird and kind of strange to say, but when I'm having just like the crappiest day and everything seems like it's wrong and everything is stressful, I go into your shop and I feel really, really awesome when I leave. Everyone's so good. And that feeling, it lasts for the rest of my day. I carry it with me. It's not just in the shop, but it affects me in a way where it brightens my entire day. And I don't know if that's super strange or creepy or weird to say, but that's just how I feel. And I said, no, that's exactly what we're going for. That's the whole idea. And I got to see how our mission has impacted someone in real time, unsolicited. Before we started the conversation, she had no idea that I owned the company. She was just excited about it. And that's what we were trying to do every time we got behind bar. And that's the power of people connecting with people anywhere. You don't have to be in service. If you're talking to another human, you have the power to lift up someone's day. And it's a 360 thing. Like, that makes us feel good. It makes you feel like you're doing good work outside of just putting coffee in a little basket and making it taste good, which is something that we're also really passionate about. But yeah, the mission just kind of evolved from caring about the broader sphere of influence that you have in that human connection. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but what we hope, and a bigger part of our vision, is to not just bring on people to Cat and Cloud and get them exposed to this, mission and values-based work environment, but to have it spin even further. So when, the future people who are starting organizations or working for other people can take that with them and hopefully there'll be more of those places in the future.
Yeah.
It's kind of obnoxious that there's not a ton of businesses that are thinking about things on a deeper level in terms of a greater purpose, a greater why, a mission that they're trying to accomplish. So that's the bigger impact that we're trying to have outside of the human being as an individual.
Yeah, which is super consistent with one of my, my personal drives, what I'm trying to drive change in, and so that's why part of why it speaks to me so much. And one of the things that I've heard a lot, just in general, is when it comes to things like mission, values, vision for the company, people tend to think like, well, that's kind of fluffy. And what I think is hit me the hardest about you guys is like, no, this actually manifests in really tangible ways. Maybe you could share with some people, what are some of the things that you guys do that maybe is not so common in your industry?
If we're talking employee benefits and packages, that's something that's been in evolution. And that's been interesting because we were really loud about it in the beginning. And this is a huge learning moment for us. So when we started out, we had these really grand ideas about what would be the most valuable for people who would come to work for us. And a lot of these things were driven off of empathy or our feelings from being an employee. It wasn't that long ago that we were on the other side of the equation. So we took what we thought were the best opportunities and put them into these packages. So when we opened up, we had, profit sharing. All the employees got X% profit sharing, is like 10% of the bottom line got distributed pro rata amongst employees, depending on how they worked. We had 4 weeks paid vacation for all full-time employees right out of the gate. We had origin trip rotation. So we would go, to buy coffee. We go to Honduras, Guatemala, Brazil, everywhere. And we just kind of made this promise that, okay, every time we go on a trip, we're going to take 1 or 2 people with us, and we're going to cycle through everyone in the staff, and they're all going to get to experience where coffee comes from. Because we're thinking in our minds, if you go to a farm, it's nothing short of a life-changing experience. And when you can see all of the work that goes into that, there's no way that you can't bring that back and speak with the guest with more passion, more energy, and also speak with your team with more passion and energy. You won't believe what happened in Colombia. You can't even, it's funny because it's not uncommon for people to go to a coffee growing region, visit a farm or a mill, and then they come back into work and they're dumping a 5-pound bag into the espresso hopper, and 1 bean falls out and it goes on the floor, and they're like, oh my God, like now I know what it took to get that in there. I'm just stressed out about this 1 coffee bean. So we started with all of these things, and we actually opened up to employee ownership. So we had a small ownership group. There were 4 members aside from myself, Jared, and Charles, that were employee owners. And in our mind, these were all signals of trust and kind of paying forward what we thought we were missing out on. So we did all that, and people thought we were crazy, and that was fine. And we were happy to be crazy, and we're not worried. That was the talk was, that's stuff that big companies do. Maybe just start out and do what you need to do, and then you can work into whatever you need to do later. You're not gonna have the money, you're not gonna have the energy, it's just a pain in the ass. But we're stubborn and obnoxious, so we just decided to do it, and it's fine because we felt that there was this trap that was, everyone's got values and ideals, and it's really easy to talk about those values and ideals, but values and ideals that are just talked about, not acted upon, are not too different than those words that were on the wall in the ER when I was waiting. It's just
Right.
fluff. And if we didn't care enough about them to take action on them as soon as we opened the company, how are we any different from anybody else? How are we not the people that we were so frustrated with earlier? So we decided to do them. And now, 5 years later, a lot of those things have changed. And some of them were slowly changing over time, and some of them changed more recently around the time of like the beginning of the pandemic. But the bigger things have been taking that ownership group people who had a little bit of equity in Cat and Cloud, and dissolving that group, turning that group into more of an executive team rather than an ownership board. So this is probably the biggest struggle that we've had as an organization in the past year, and our biggest revelation as business owners and people who are trying to create an intentional culture, which was because at organizations that we worked at in the past, we've often felt like we had a voice that wasn't heard. We had something to contribute, and that contribution wasn't always listened to, and that was incredibly frustrating. So when we started Cat and Cloud, we wanted to give people a voice who didn't have a voice. We wanted to have this team. So we developed this team, this ownership team. And what happened was we had a couple people in the group that definitely weren't culturally vibing with where we want to go. We had ourselves as leaders who weren't as advanced as we hoped we would be. For all our intention, we're still incredibly imperfect, and we're learning all the time. And what we ended up with was this kind of company that was run by committee. So we'd have myself, Jared, and Charles, 4 other people. We would sit in a room for hours on end and discuss direction and discuss what's the best way to maneuver through this. And because no one really had final say or final approval, and we wanted to be so empathetic, or we wanted everybody's voice to be heard, we would spin ourselves around and around and around and around in circles quite a bit. And we'd also have other people in that group look at us and say, you can't do this. This isn't how this company is supposed to be running. Like, this isn't what we signed up for. This isn't how it works. And it affected a lot of things in a really negative way. We had a lot of different pockets, even within that ownership group of, I had people coming to me to talk about, how Jared was nuts. There were people going to Jared to talk about how I was nuts. It was just a really convoluted thing. And Jared and I had a lot of work to do on our relationship as well. And a couple of those people ended up moving on, which ended up being a really amazing thing. It felt very, very stressful in the moment, but at the beginning of the pandemic, where everything just kind of exploded for a lot of people, it was kind of this wake up call, which was, okay, if we're going to get through this, which is probably going to be one of the most challenging things we're ever going to go through in our lifetime as a business, hopefully, if we're going to get through this, we need really clear, thoughtful leadership. We need someone to take control of the situation, and we need to move through this in a way. We need someone to lead us through this. And that kind of was the catalyst for reforging a lot of those bonds between myself, Jared, and Charles, and rethinking a lot of what we're doing. And we came to some interesting realizations about stepping into kind of our power as leaders, which is, here's the weird paradox of leadership, which is like, okay, cool. This is our company. We created this company from our vision that we believe in, and this is what that vision means. And nobody else can tell us what that vision means, because we have an incredibly clear idea of what it means. So the vision and how it manifests is not really up for discussion. It's not up for discussion at all. This is our lane. And we weren't always super good at articulating it because we wanted everybody to be happy. But the process of stepping in and owning that, and when you say that, it's easy to conjure up images of the boss who is just like, this is what you have to do. This is what work is. You got to do this. You're here to do this job, and that's it. And you do the job, and you shut up, and you do the work. What we found was exactly the opposite, which is, it was kind of reigniting that flare and like being really brazen about waving that around and be like, hey, in no uncertain terms, this is exactly what we're about. This is exactly what we mean when we say inspire connection by creating memorable experiences. This is exactly the opportunity that's on offer for everybody here. And if this feels good to you, if this makes you, smile on the inside, if this brings out something awesome in you, you should come with us on this. If this doesn't feel right to you, if this doesn't feel like it's what you signed up for, if this mission doesn't excite you, this might not be the place for you. And that's okay, because we're not making a judgment on who you are as a person. We're not making a judgment on, you're making a good decision or a bad decision by leaving. Everyone is entitled to their own, to seek out their own happiness. And if it's not with us, that's great. And, we'll help you out on your way out. But what we're not going to do is spend 10 hours. And I had employees that were super unhappy and not really jiving. And I would spend hours and hours on the phone with them every day, trying to convince them that this was a good place, trying to convince them that my intent was pure, trying to convince them that Cat and Cloud was going to be something awesome. And it wasn't time well spent, honestly. It was incredibly stressful, and it's a huge learning moment, because now those conversations are a lot easier about, it seems like you're really unhappy here, and that's okay. Let's figure out a way to get you where you're happy, because it's not good for anybody else to have this cultural dissonance here. So through the process of stepping into that, ironically, all of the things that we hoped to provide as an organization have been blossoming out of this really honed in direction, which is now the people that are on board in that executive team that meets every Friday. The people who run the cafes actually do have a lot more autonomy. There is more trust. They take on more and they execute more, and it's all within this scope of what our mission and values are. And it's this really weird paradox of, it seems like loose leadership would lead to people taking ownership, but it really doesn't.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there. It's because I think your initial, where you guys started, and the observation and the intent behind it around people need to be heard is absolutely valid. But at the end of the day, it's not democracy.
What you said there was perfect. Leadership by democracy was not really working for us. And now that we have this huge alignment that we've never had before, like the alignment with the leadership team is the best it's ever been in our entire tenure. And with that alignment comes the ability for people's voice to be heard even more. So, let's take Levi, who he runs 2 of our stores. He's a team leader for 2 of our stores. And this is a person who, in the beginning, when we were making these big changes, he came and talked to us, and, he said, I'm willing to try this out. My struggle is I don't know you guys. I was hired by other people. Those people aren't here anymore. You're telling us all this stuff. It feels like something that I would want to be a part of, but I don't really know you, and I haven't worked with you. Yeah. And we're like, okay, cool. That's absolutely fair. We totally get that. If this feels like it could be a good place with you, let's just move forward, and we'll work on building the trust, and we'll communicate. And if we get a month in and you're like, holy shit, this isn't what I want it to be, no hard feelings. He stuck it out. We made an intentional effort to bond, because at the time, now he's one of the most experienced people. We make an intentional effort to bond with him, connect with him over certain things, be able to share in a very tangible way, one-on-one, hear what that mission means from our mouths, and not just passed down through a bunch of other people, filtered in really strange ways. That was kind of the really big opportunity with the pandemic too. We had a lot of one-on-one, a lot of connection time in a time that felt very disconnected. And now he's crushing it, for lack of a better term. He is so aligned, has adopted the mission and the values on such a high level that when we come to the meeting on Friday and we're having, this discussion, he has proven and earned the right to not challenge the mission or the values. But when we're looking at doing things a certain way, he can raise his hand and say, I don't think that's going to work. And here's why. Here's 2 or 3 ways that I think we could do it better. It's going to get us into the same place that we wanted to go. It's still in that same lane of this aligns with the Cat and Cloud ethos. But because I'm really close to the front line, I think this is going to be better. And that's awesome, because then he, he gets to be heard. He gets to have his contribution matter, because there are things that he knows that we just don't know. He spends his experience is different. And that's been one of the beautiful things that's come with that really intentional values alignment, is that people's autonomy has grown, even though we're laser focused on where we want to be.
Yeah. That's interesting how it works that way, but it totally makes sense. And well, so that's a pretty massive journey to have gone through. What if you kind of looking back from where you sit right now, and from all the way back to when you guys were thinking about this was just an idea you were getting going. What's been most different for you than what you expected this journey to be as a business owner?
Oh, man. Oh, that's a great question. I hitting the heavies. I don't know, because I don't know. I don't know what I expected. I think maybe the thing that was probably the most shocking, especially, and this kind of ties on to what we just talked about, was when you set out with an idea. Like we had the intention to do something good, do something that was better, do something that was a little different, do something that included the people around us. And I don't think either Jared, Charles, or myself expected that our intentions would be held up so high in terms of, expecting perfection from us. Because we've done the podcast since day one. We have not been shy, and we've continually made a lot of noise about the things that we believe in. So maybe the biggest shocker, it was, hey, here's these things we believe in. This is what we're thinking. This is how we're going to share it with you. In my mind, it's a no-brainer. Oh, people are going to come and follow. They're going to be incredibly grateful, and they're going to want to do their best work to make this thing awesome. And because of that, they're going to grow themselves, and that's going to be the win-win. We weren't ready for opening up that door to run this company by democracy, to have people look at us and say, you're not following through on what you promised. This isn't what the Cat and Cloud mission means. You say one thing and you mean another. Jared we recorded a podcast yesterday, and Jared was having this struggle. He's like, nothing made me really feel as bad was when certain employees would come up to me and say, hey, you need to prove to me why I should even want to work here. And he's like, that hurts, because I feel like I'm trying really hard. We have the best intentions in mind. And I mean, the reality is that we took on something that we just weren't super good at in terms of, we'd been working in coffee forever, right? 20 plus years experience, each of us, in specialty coffee. So the cafe situation, that's second nature to us. We know all the tricks of the trade. We know how to create a great guest experience. We know how to make and roast amazing coffee. That's not new territory. We're still always trying to be better, but that's nothing new. The shocker comes when and I think a lot of people get caught up in this, whereas you're really good at something, so you decide to open a business doing that thing, and you realize that aside from the ideas that you have in your mind, you don't really have any experience. Like, I was not terribly great at interpersonal communication. I'd always been good at, writing. I could speak to a crowd if I wanted to. I was passionate about sharing my ideas, but if sitting down with someone, giving feedback, doing that whole thing was completely foreign to me. I just never practiced it. All of those soft skills, what people call soft skills, that you have the opportunity to learn the whole time, like, I didn't know any of them. And neither did Jared, neither did Charles. We just had good ideas. So it's not surprising that we had some bumps in the road. It's just crazy how bad they hurt when they happen, and how it's hard to shake them off. There's not that clear line between, oh, cool, I clocked out and now I'm done with work. I went home, but I'm still mentally there.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between who I want to be as a boss and where I'm at. And how can I keep trying to be the boss that my employees deserve, And, part of me is just trying to accept that that's a lifelong journey, that, where I'm at now is better than 3 years ago. And in 3 years from now, I'll look at myself and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much I didn't know. But man, it's tricky.
Yeah.
I just wasn't ready for it, and
Yeah.
I think that is where we're at now, because we've gone through this really hard time. I feel my biggest power is still being able to see things from the employee's perspective. Like I said, it wasn't that long ago where I knew what it felt like to be on the other side of the equation. Now I know what it feels like to, like, you remember being the employee and not understanding how all the pieces come together. So you're like, why don't they just do this? This would be so easy and it would fix
Yeah,
everything.
right.
Why don't they just do that? That would be so easy and fix everything. And I think there's this this idea that I'm growing in passion with, is there's this bridge to be built. People talk about leadership in a vacuum without addressing employees. People talk about employees and what they should do in a vacuum without addressing leadership. And I don't think either party needs to prove anything to the other party, but they need to understand where the other party's going. If you can have empathy for your employee, it doesn't mean you have to be a pushover, but it can help make you a better leader. If you're an employee, if you have empathy for your boss, if you understand the needs of the organization in a greater way than just the transactional relationship in front of you, it's going to make you a better employee. And, each party feels like they're trying to, push the onus of responsibility onto the other party. I can't take responsibility from where I'm at because my company doesn't foster my growth and do this stuff. And then, the bosses are like, I can't do what I need to do because my employees are lazy and they're unmotivated and I just can't find good people to work. And it's becoming more and more clear that the more people understand the other's point of view, the better we all can be. And a lot of it has to do with having conversations, and conversations that aren't always incredibly easy. And that's something that I'm really bad at. And that's maybe been one of the hardest things, because when I talk with an employee and I can see myself, 10 years ago in that employee, it feels like I'm talking to me sometimes. And it's really hard to give myself that critical feedback to say, hey, I understand where you're going with this, and this, but let's look at this from a broader perspective. Let's look at this not in terms of what happened right now, but let's look at this in terms of the organization. Let's look in terms of your personal growth. What do you want to do? Like, where are you at? We're in a cafe, we're making coffee. We did this exercise with the marketing team, because that's one of the departments that I directly interface with. We skipped our meeting one week and we just kind of talked about, hey, take 20 minutes, write a few things down. Let's think about what you're doing now, what you would hope to be doing in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. What are some dreams and goals that you have, not just related to work, but related to who you are as a person, the kind of person you want to be, the impact that you want to have in the world, or a dream that extends outside of work. That's a challenge in enough already, because it's hard for people to want to admit that I have dreams outside of my current job. Is that going to mean I'm on the fast track to be on the chopping block, or is it going to seem that like I'm checked out or whatever? So that there's a barrier to break down to having that conversation. But if you can break down that barrier, one of the beautiful things that happens is people are opening up with these things that don't seem like they directly connect with work. So one of the guys that I work with, he's had this thing where I start all these projects. I feel like I'm a very project-based person, and he's showing us, 10 things that he started to create but didn't finish creating. He's like, I'm basically an inventor. I want to invent things. And the thing that's been kind of missing in his life was taking it all the way to Z, getting it out of the brain and getting it into the world and sharing it with other people. And we discovered through this conversation that he's never really had a support group or a group of people around him that made him feel like his ideas were worthwhile, or like a safe place to practice and doing these things. So he's a very creative person. He creates some digital assets, some marketing assets, writes some copy, creates visuals. So I was like, all right, this is awesome. Like this is great. You know, I want to encourage you to take these things to Z, but I can see how, you know, it's a big jump. So this is what we're going to do. You know, basically finding a way to frame all of the small projects that he does in the organization as kind of building that muscle of you make something and you put it out there and it exists, and maybe it sucks, but it probably doesn't, and just getting used to sharing your work. So that's like another level. You know, he's already doing good work, but when you frame it in like, okay, I get the opportunity to practice doing something that's really important to me personally through my work, and I can see how that all connects. Those things are really fun, and those conversations are hard for me because you kind of have to challenge people on the excuses that they're making for themselves and the limiting beliefs that they have. And I know because I've had similar limiting beliefs, and it's just, I mean, I don't know if I was ready for that.
Yeah,
I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, who is really? It's one of the hardest things, I think, just about management in general is like the people who, let's say you don't go your path, even just you're in another organization and you get promoted into a managerial type of role because you were good at that role. And then you take on this management role and you're managing other people, many of whom, by the way, are never going to be as good as you were. That's why you got promoted into management. But set that aside, it's like a completely different skill set. It's not something you can learn from a book. I mean, you can learn things from a book and then apply them, but the actual learning happens through the experience and all the different things that are happening there. And nobody necessarily can quite articulate even some of the things you were talking about earlier as a business owner. What does it feel like emotionally to be in that situation? Because it's way different than what you think it is.
100%. And one of the things that has been so enlightening for me is when I think back to when I was younger and working for other people, the people who ran the organizations that I was working for, I looked up to them as, oh my gosh, these people are full blown adults. They're brave enough to take the plunge to, you know, to start the business. They're kind of these mythical creatures, and I held them in very high esteem. And I think that's why I was so disappointed when things didn't go exactly how I planned, or they would let me down. And looking at it from where I'm at now, it's like, oh my God, I'm older now than all of the people that I previously worked for. And I can see that, you know, I worked for a lot of them in their first, second, third years of business. And I know what it was like to work for me in our first, second, third years of business. And it's no wonder they let me down, because they're not perfect. They don't know everything. They were learning as they're going, just as we're learning as we're going. And that's been a huge eye opener for me. And I think on the employee side of the equation, I think that's where employees have a real opportunity, not just to affect the organization, but to build skills for themselves by realizing that the people who lead their companies are completely imperfect. They are learning as they're going, and that doesn't make them bad leaders. You know, that just makes them, it makes them what they are. They're learning. They need people around them that are strong, that are committed, that are capable. And if you as an employee can be one of those people and look past shortcomings and say like, okay, cool, I believe that, you know, I believe in Chris and Jared and Charles, that their intention is in the right place. I know they're not going to hit 10 out of 10, be 100% awesome leaders, but they're going in a direction that vibes with me. And I'm going to accept them in all of their imperfections. And because of that, I'm going to step up. I'm going to step up and take ownership where I'm at. That's a beautiful thing, because not only do you get to be a benefit to the organization, you get to be a rock for that leader who is also learning. You get to learn yourself. You get to learn what it feels like to do things that are hard, to take on that responsibility, to go above and beyond, and seeing it outside of the context of work, is where I'm not just trying to be a good worker. I'm trying to build myself as a professional. I'm trying to be a better person. And when opportunities do come up, when you do need a trusted source on the front line, people are going to seek out those people. It's this really crazy ecosystem where we all have to acknowledge our own imperfections but play forward. So
Yeah,
I don't know, man.
for
Leadership
sure.
is it's an amazing world.
Yeah. Well, so I was curious about the podcast. So, like, obviously, you guys, there's a lot that you just you kind of put out there. That radical kind of transparency. How has that benefited you? And has there been any like repercussions or things that maybe haven't worked as well about it?
Yeah, it's amazing as a tool internally. Like if you're an employee and you listen to the podcast, you basically have a direct line into our brains, and you're tapped into what's going on in the company, and it sets you up to be able to perform at a higher level than you could ever do it just through, your standard day-to-day coaching and operations. It's almost like a cheat code. If
Yeah.
you
Right.
if you come on and you're like, I want to level up and I want to contribute. Oh, okay, cool. I got the cheat code. It's right here in the podcast. So that's been cool. It's been such a benefit for us to be able to have this release valve, because sometimes, early on in the podcast, if you listen from day one, a lot of the podcast was, this is what is happening. This is what's going to go down. This is how it's going to be. And over time, it's evolved to, what do you think about this? How is this going to work? I'm wondering what we can do here. Always sprinkled in, like I said, we're very opinionated, and we own those beliefs, things related to what we want our company to be and how we want those things to manifest. We have a very clear vision, but a lot of it now is unpacking possibility, tackling problems. So that's been really good for our relationship as business owners and a way to process things. Talking about stuff on the podcast definitely makes it easier to go to sleep at night. When
Yeah.
we record on Wednesday and it's everything that's in my brain, I get to download that with Jared and sometimes Charles. That helps. From the outside looking in terms of finding employees, the podcast has made it really tricky, because a lot of people come to try to work for us simply because they think we're cool. And we've been doing a lot of interviews in the last month because we're building back up. Things are starting to open back up. We're about to start playing towards doing inside service and adding things. It's a whole package deal. When the pandemic hit, not only did our cafes drop down in number of people and service limitations, but all of our wholesale partners had the same thing. So, our production as an overall company decreased, and now it's ramping up, and we need more humans to help with that. So we've been doing these interviews, and it's interesting to see who listens to the podcast and what they pull out of it. We've had amazing interviews where people perfectly articulate what we're all about. They are just so connected with the ideas that are Cat and Cloud, and those interviews are really amazing. And then some of the interviews are people who listen to the podcast and they find the 15% that works for them, and they kind of talk about that over and over again, where it's like, oh, what, it seems like you've got a lot of experience. What was one of the things that drew you to Cat and Cloud? What made you decide to put in your resume here? It's like, man, you guys are just awesome. It's really awesome. You guys are just for the people. It's all about people. You guys are for the people. You're all about your employees. It's all about people. And that's a snippet of things, or it's like, man, I just love it. You guys are just doing good. It seems like you're doing cool. It's really awesome. And you unpack the conversation with certain people, and there's one group of people that latch onto one specific thing that you're talking about, and usually that's the employee empathy portion of it.
Sure.
And depending on how they articulate that, I might get the sense that, man, they might have some really interesting expectations of what our mission means and how they're going to operate in that. And it feels a little risky because I'm pretty sure they're not as culturally aligned as we think they are. There's a certain percentage of people who just think what we're doing is cool. Oh, I love the aesthetic. It feels cool. You guys are just so cool. It's a cool brand. And while that feels nice to hear, if that's the level of interaction with where we're at, those people are probably better off being simply guests and not a part of the organization. And yeah, when you put stuff out there, it comes with this whole grab bag. So we're really sifting through people, and it's been a challenge to see who's really connecting with the essence of what we want to do versus just thinking it's awesome. And also, we see this manifest in employees sometimes. We have people who we bring on who are amazing people who really love what we're about, but they're not up for the challenge of what it is. It's not the easiest place to work at Cat and Cloud. It's really not. We have a lot of fun. We undoubtedly make a difference. And that's why it's so challenging. You can't make a huge difference in people's lives phoning it in. You have to put intentionality into where you're at and what you're doing at every level to be able to create those experiences that make us cool. And that's hard work. And some people just love the end result and don't want to do the work. And that's awesome. Again, no judgment for them as individuals, but maybe not the best place for them to work, but a great place for them to come get coffee.
Yeah, I can see the expectation thing for sure as being an issue. And then even this notion of it being hard work to kind of pull off what you guys are pulling off. I think that part of the reason why there aren't more businesses that are trying to go about things the way that you guys are is because it is harder. But they're also, I think, sometimes not seeing that there is actually a tangible business payback to it as well. That it's not just we're doing this for good, and just trying to put good out in the world, and that's it. And even if that's the intention, which I think sometimes that could be, it still comes back in other ways that actually tend to positively impact business results. And that's the stuff that I think a lot of people don't necessarily see. And so I'm just curious, like maybe reflect on that a little bit. What's been your experience with that? Is that true in your experience?
100%. Absolutely. Undoubtedly. I mean, even if you were purely, we'll look at it from the other perspective of what you described. If you are a business owner and let's say you're absolutely the most selfish jerk ever, and you only care about having a strong bottom line, and you want to be in business for any length of time, the best way to do that is by creating a healthy culture. There's no way around it. You can cheat the system in spurts. Simon Sinek writes about this in The Infinite Game, where when you're focusing solely on short-term game, maximizing profits, in the big business world, it'd be doing everything with your main metric of being shareholder supremacy. Businesses exist to generate money for the shareholders. Month over month, quarter over quarter, we need to see results. Whatever is going to bump that number up, that's what we'll do, regardless of what it does to our culture, regardless of what it does to the people around us, how unhealthy the organization is. And that works for a while. You can get returns on it for a while. I could open up a coffee shop and say, I'm going to pay everyone the bare minimum. So I'm going to make money by slicing labor. And then, training's kind of a pain in the ass. So I'm going to kind of skimp on training a little bit, because every time I hire someone, there's a lot, there's turnover, and it's X amount of man hours to get someone to make coffee. So we're just going to cut corners on training. And instead of spending the time, we'll just put signs up all over that are reminding you to do this, clean that, I'll have a checklist based company, because that seems a little cheaper. If I have a little bit of product knowledge, that will get me more profits for a tiny amount of time, right? And then after that, things start to degrade from the inside and the outside. It's not just that the people who work for me don't feel connected to anything that they're doing. They don't feel invested because they haven't been invested in. They don't know why they're even coming to work. It doesn't exist. But the guests who are coming in the door can see, I don't like going there because the people that go there don't care about me. They don't care about the work they're doing. They don't take pride in their ownership, and the coffee's okay, but everything else about it sucks. So maybe I could pad my pockets for a little bit, but then am I ready for the bottom to drop out where nobody comes to my organization, and then I have to default on my lease and sell everything and start over? And when you can do, 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 when you can do like approach it from a cultural perspective and see it not just as paying out for other people, but as an investment in the people who work for you and ultimately back into your business and to the guests who come in the doors. Yeah, it's way better. I mean, we see that all the time. The wholesale program is a prime example. So in a past life, one of the jobs that I held was head of business development for a coffee roasting company. So I was in charge of this small sales team, and I was in charge of account accrual, which was something that I really didn't want to do. I had this weird experience where the person who was the CEO at the time had kind of brought me into his office and was talking to me, and I was talking about my growth and my opportunities and, you know, what I could do to contribute. And in classic business person fashion, you know, he writes down this thing on this piece of paper, he folds it up and he slides it across the desk.
No.
And I'm like, oh my God. So I pick it up and it says head of business development, and I folded it up and shot it back to him. I was like, no way. No, I absolutely do not want that job.
No, you're supposed to write a massive number and then slide it back across the tail.
I was like, brah. I wasn't bold enough to do that then, even though it would have been pretty amazing for his story. I didn't want to do that job. It didn't feel good to me. Anyway, I got talked into doing that job.
Anyway, I did the job.
I took the job, and the culture that we were in was really, really growth oriented. And we were really making an active play to try to pitch to bigger tech companies to get coffee into these bigger tech companies. So I remember with one account, which was just a huge, ridiculous account, I had months of being on the phone trying to convince them that we were the right choice for them, and engaging in these price wars to where, you know, I'd have these conversations where it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I hear it. You guys seem like you're cool, but so-and-so is going to give me this amount per pound, and it's $1 under where you are, and they're going to give me this service. And what can you do for me there? So then, you know, I hang up the phone, I talk to the CEO and I talk to the CFO. I'm like, here's the opportunity. This is what they're doing. That's what they're doing. And I'm like, calling back, like, you know, okay, well, we can't do that, but we can do this and that. And maybe we could get this in here. And it's just these month-long bargaining wars. And one of these accounts we ended up getting. But I remember once we got the account, I had the feeling that at any given time, if we do one thing wrong, or if they get one tiny better offer, they are completely out the door, because they're not really bought into who we are as a company. You know, we had to fight like tooth and nail to get them. And now that we got them, it just doesn't feel like a secure relationship. Fast forward to Cat and Cloud. The way it works now is it's no mystery who we are as a company because of the information that we put out there. If you listen to the podcast a little bit or read some of the things that we write, you have a pretty good idea of who we are. So Alex, who's in charge of our partner program, and, you know, he works with Mark, and they have these conversations where people come to them and are like, hey, I know what you're all about. I want to be a part of this. I'm opening a cafe. Let's go. We don't have to sell anything. So, you know, aside from calculating the cost of how many months I lost in these negotiating wars, that's whatever amount of money. How can you calculate the cost of being in a partnership that feels incredibly solid? You know, it feels like someone has chosen you because of who you are as at your core, and not just because it's convenient or not just because it's cheaper. You know, those relationships are more stable in the same way that a relationship with another human being is more stable, because they value you as a person, not because they're engaging in a relationship with you. Like, oh, like, I know Chris and he owns a coffee company. Maybe if I'm friends with him, he can get me free coffee. And that's what our relationship is based off of. So the same thing happens in business. So yeah, I don't know how you would calculate that cost. And then how do you calculate the cost of what it feels like to talk to people who are awesome every day? You know, how do you calculate the cost of being on the phone with people that are fucking badass? Like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to all these. This is the best job ever. You know, Mark's checking up on clients and it's amazing, you know?
Yeah. No, totally. So, I got a couple more questions I want to ask you if you've got a couple more minutes.
I'm down. Okay. Let's keep going. I'm ready.
All right.
I'm not worried at all about anything.
Business is hard, right? And you said like part of the podcast is like one mechanism for kind of just being able to unplug and decompress, and just from like a mental well-being standpoint, are there other things that you found helpful that you do? And it could be personal to you. I'm not looking necessarily for things that generalize, but it's something that I think so many people grapple with. And so I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit about like, how do you approach your own mental well-being and balance and things like that?
Yeah, the first thing is my morning routine is incredibly important to me. And I know morning routines are just they're so in right now. Everyone's got the magic morning routine. And for me, it's more about starting my day off with intentionality and feeling like I'm controlling things just makes me feel more in control. So every morning I get up, I have a routine where I make myself coffee and I write every morning. And the writing is kind of this blur between, I wouldn't call it strict journaling and I wouldn't call it creative writing, but it's somewhere in between, and it's not planned. It's just whatever's coming into my mind. And it could be, something that I've been thinking about for a couple days, couple weeks. It's just been kind of inspiring me or nagging at me. That all gets written down. 30 to 45 minutes in the morning of just doing that to set my day off right has been incredibly helpful. The biggest thing that helps with my mental well-being is skateboarding. I'll tell you why. Like you said, it's not like everyone's going to start skateboarding and then, oh, that's going to help them out. But skateboarding is something that's been a huge part of my life for as long as I can remember. And, through junior high and high school, especially at the time, it was the thing that I identified myself with. It was at the core of everything I did and all these different life experiences that I was having. It was truly my first love. So the cool thing about skating now is there's a huge physical component to it. And if I don't exercise in some capacity, whether that's skating, strength training, whatever, I'm just a complete train wreck. My brain just doesn't function. But the key about skating for me is the group that I skate with. I'm just Chris who skates. That's it. There's a huge portion of people that I skate with that we don't even know what we do for a living. Like I have people that I've been skating with for months and sometimes years, and I don't know what they do for work. And I think that's awesome because we go to the park or we go to the spot and it's a completely different social situation. You're not, oh, I'm a truck driver. He's the owner of Cat and Cloud. I work in tech. It's just, we're skating, we're here, and we shoot the breeze. And to have the identity that is completely detached from the business owner leadership portion of my life is huge, because so much of my workday, really all of my workday, I'm the person that people look towards. I exist to provide inspiration for other people. I exist to set an environment where people can grow up. I exist to figure out ways to move the organization forward. And when you're in that position, it's a lot of energy out. And one of the things that Jared and I often talk about is, man, our ideal situation is to balance that energy output with something that'll put the energy back in. And when I show up to skate, there is absolutely zero expectation of me as a leader. And that's pretty amazing to have that bit of freedom. And then for whatever reason, I always figure out how to turn anything into work. So I spiral from there, because I'm like, oh yeah, skating's cool, but we should film something. Oh yeah, filming's cool, but we should make a video. It's really easy for me to take these like purely fun things and turn them into these whole like big scale projects. And but I think getting in different social situations where you are not defined by what you do is incredibly important. And that didn't exist for probably the first 2 or 3 years of owning Cat and Cloud, because it just didn't feel like there was the bandwidth. I'd always made time to do some sort of physical activity, but as far as a social scene, I didn't have one, and it negatively affected me. My wife has been, a huge supporter since day one and before. And, she's been there for me, but just I'm really bad at making friends. So making getting a group of friends together has been a lifesaver for me.
Yeah, right. Well, that totally resonates with me because I think when you can completely be like you're using a totally different part of yourself in that. So it's like it forces you, and it's like it's concentrated too. So it's like you can't not be fully there with it. You can't be like, oh,
Yes.
I'm like, half of me still thinking about coffee or this conversation I had earlier.
Yeah, casually skating is a recipe for disaster. If you're
Yeah.
halfway there, you're going to get laid out and it's going to be real bad.
Yeah. On what you said about like you didn't feel like you had room for that in the early phase, that's something that I feel like a lot of people grapple with. I grapple with it myself. How much do this trade off of kind of like going hard today for some future when you can relax a little bit more, take the foot off the gas a little bit more? How do you think about that?
I mean, in my, that's a good question. Balance is real, but balance can't always be there, because if you look at, in my experience, anything that I've done that mattered on a really high level, something else got sacrificed for some length of time to make that happen. I think about it in terms of, sliders on an EQ or something. You can crank one channel of your life way up, but you got to turn another one down. And the decision that everybody has to make is, how long can I live with that cranked before I make the intentional choice to rebalance? And for me in Cat and Cloud, it was, there was some point in time that it was really hard to articulate. So you like, I remember the first couple of weeks in business, I'm at the shop all day, every day. I left to eat lunch and then I came right back, open, close, week after week, month after month. Even on, we tried to schedule, oh yeah, we'll have these days off and we can take a break. There was just this nagging feeling inside of me that's, I need to be here.
Yeah.
It feels really important for me to be here. It seems like I should be here. And that wasn't too different from, Jared and I have this competitive barista background, which is its own little animal. So yes, there are barista competitions, and yeah, we're former barista champions. As hilarious as that sounds, that's a part of the world where we came from. And during competition season, it's kind of like a season for any other sport. There's a regional, there's a national, and you'd set aside a chunk of time. And for me, I get really engrossed in the things that I do. So cool. I know for the next 3 months of my life, I'm spending every day after work, not going home and playing, but I'm going to come back to the cafe after I close, and I'm going to do competition run throughs, and I'm going to taste coffee, and I'm going to dial things in, and I'm going to work on signature drinks. And that's kind of how opening the business was, where I'm just going to be here all the time. And then at some point, I don't even know how to quantify this, I felt like, okay, I think I could take a day off and not go. I think I could take 2 days off and not go. I don't know if I could take a week off yet. I don't know if we're there. And it's different for everybody. And a lot of it for us revolved around bringing up people who we trusted to be there when we were not, to provide some of the leadership and decision-making power that we provided, which was a lot. I mean, you have 3 owners in our one cafe every day, all day for however many months. The first day when all of those 3 people aren't there, it feels different. It feels, it's weird. So, constantly training to bring someone up to replace what you're doing so that you can take things one to another level for the organization, but also have some bandwidth. Ideas, for me, ideas come out of like a vacuum, and that's something you'll hear. Oh, I have a great idea when I'm in the shower. I have a great idea when I'm walking. I have a great ideas when I'm able to disconnect. So when I'm able to step away, I actually have some of the best ideas for the organization ever. But I don't know if I can even answer that question as to when or how. But as far as philosophy, as hustle versus balance, I think of it in terms of seasons. Right now, the beginning of the pandemic was definitely a hustle season. There's nothing you could do about it. If you have a business, your business is on the line. The economy's in an interesting place. everything has changed. You're at the whim of different rules and regulations. And even if they're well-intentioned, they have consequences. So you have no choice but to be all in right then, and something else is going to suffer. And then once you get to a little bit of a place that feels okay, cool, I'm going to back off. So now we're kind of in that process of looking towards when the next back off is going to be. And then we'll ramp again when we open a new location or take on a new project. And right now I feel very, very fortunate because we have team leaders at the cafes. We have people who run the roastery and the wholesale partner program. So in theory, I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. My life doesn't feel like a grind, but I put a lot of pressure on myself to generate new ideas and improve processes and drive everything forward. So I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know how to answer that. But at some point, if you don't take care of yourself, everything around you is going to crumble. So you might have to deal with that uncomfortable feeling of checking out for a little bit, even when it doesn't feel like you maybe should.
Yeah.
You might feel a little bit guilty about it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You don't need to feel that guilt. You can still take a couple of days off because, you know, if you run out of energy, everyone else isn't that far behind.
Yeah, right. And it is a marathon, so like if you don't force the break, sometimes they'll never come organically.
Yeah, and I think a lot of setting things up is, you know, what, there's no cruising altitude in business, right? You never get to a point to where you're thinking, cool, everything's perfect, now I can relax, or everything's great, now I can relax. Undoubtedly, you'll have sprints like I just talked about, but I think a better version for doing things is, let's say you have a project. You need to do this project and you're brainstorming how the project is going to work out. You say, okay, cool, we're going to do this project and it's going to happen in the next month. And I'm going to do this amount of work every day, this amount of work the next day. And you Gantt chart the whole thing out. And then you have this tangible deliverable that happens in 1 month. Stepping back and looking in terms of that marathon mindset and say, okay, we could do this project in a month and my life will be a living hell, but we'll get it done. What happens if we take 2 months to do the project instead of 1 month, and it gets done a little bit slower? Your life's not a living hell. And at the end of the day, you know, if you're looking 3 or 4 or 5 years into the future, you know, getting that one project done 1 month ahead of time isn't going to make it or break it in terms of your business. So I try to think about things where it's like, how can you push, but also still make work not feel super just insane every day? And it's hard when you're the business owner or the entrepreneur, because your gift is your curse. You know, you have a vision for how things can be better, so you never run out of seeing imperfections. There's always something to be fixed, and being able to triage that instead of, I got these 10 things I need to do right now. It's like, all right, this is our focus for right now. All of these other things I'm going to actively ignore. I know they're wrong. I know they need to be fixed. And that's advice that I often give to employees too, in terms of giving feedback up the chain of command, which is, hey, if you come to your boss and you see something that's wrong, you better have a solution or set of solutions that go along with that problem, because problems are really easy to point out. And the sad truth is that, or just the realistic truth of the whole thing is, your boss probably already knows. They probably already see what you see. They probably know that thing is wrong. They might just be like, man, you know, Jared talks about it in terms of, you know, he's cooking a dinner. He's like, I'm frying this fish, I'm frying that fish. I don't have room on the grill for this other one, but it's kind of waiting in the wings. So what we need is not someone to say, hey man, this is the problem. We need someone to say, hey, you know, I noticed there was this problem. Here's 3 ideas that I have that could fix it. This is the one that I think is the best, and I'm willing to take this on if you say that's cool. You know, that's a big benefit of leading up the chain of command. But it's hard to ignore those things.
Yeah, well, it is, but it's also, I mean, there's always gonna be stuff that's like just out of reach. It just, you know, that's part of the prioritization. And it's all right. I got one last question for you. And then I will let you go, I promise.
I'm good.
So one of the big things that I want to do with this show in particular, and it's part of what you guys are doing is just so encapsulates what I'm trying to encourage other people to do. And so it's whether it's to people who are currently working somewhere for somebody else, or it's somebody who's got like a vision for something they might want to build themselves, on the side, or they want to go take the leap and create their own business. I see that there's so many people who I think a lot of the stuff that you've talked about today, it resonates with them. It resonates with me because we feel it, that there's a different way things can be done. There's a way to like have an impact that is deeper and maybe a little more lasting, that makes everybody's lives a little better, individual connections more meaningful. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying a lot of those people don't take action. They
Right.
feel stuck. They feel like it's too much of a risk. They don't know how to go about it. So my question to you would be, if you got somebody in that situation who's like, I know I could do more. Like, I know I could have a bigger impact, either where I am now or somewhere else, and they're dragging their feet. How do you coach somebody in that situation to get them moving in a forward direction?
It's always smallest first step. Smallest, like what's the tiniest thing that you could do? The smallest step that you could take that would be forward but real. Because I mean, geez, we'll talk about it in terms of entrepreneurship, because there's so much of this in the business owner entrepreneurship world where you hear people using these platitudes and tropes where it's like, you got to go all in, bro. You got to like commit. You got to like 100%. If it's not everything, it's nothing, and nothing could be further from the truth. Going all in sounds incredibly scary. It sounds incredibly uprooting. It sounds completely unknown. And you have to realize when you're making suggestions about what people should do with their projects, with their businesses, with their lives, it's hard to make suggestions without knowing each person's individual situation. If I talk to someone who's 25 years old, isn't married, has no family, and is comfortable living in a van and doing the van life thing, advice to them is going to be different than someone who's 45 years old, has a couple kids, is married, and has a mortgage to pay for. It's unlikely that the older person's got a more established family life, has the flexibility to just drop whatever they're doing, even if they have an idea for this project, and go all in on it and be like, I'm going to quit my job, my source of income that's paying for my mortgage and feeding my kids, and just start to do this thing, because that seems like the cowboy entrepreneurship thing to do. But I think the encouragement that I have to give is that every step in the right direction counts. There's so many people I know who have things that are hidden inside of them, things that it's that stuff that you think about when you go to sleep at night. It's that nagging idea that it keeps popping up in your head, and you just can't get rid of it. It just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back. And honoring those things is huge. And a step to doing that could be something as simple as talking about it, sharing it with someone else. That's a big first step. That's not nothing. It's not like until you have the finished product, you don't have anything. Our business is a series of baby steps. Before we started anything, we started the podcast. The podcast existed before Cat and Cloud existed, before we had a business entity. And it was just, okay, we have an idea to talk about something that we're passionate about, which was this combination of coffee and culture, just from our perspective. We're not experts. We just have these ideas. We have a certain amount of people who will follow us because we had, like I said, we had that credibility within the coffee industry. That was Cat and Cloud 1.0, just a podcast. Cat and Cloud 2.0 was, okay, we don't know what we're doing, but it could be fun to sell some coffee. So Julia, who was the person I mentioned before, who drew the original logo, we talked to her and we're like, hey, we were thinking of doing this thing. Do you think we could use your roastery in the off hours to just roast some coffee and ship it? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. So we built this basic little website, and the website had, 2 coffees on it. And, we designed a hat and a shirt or a mug or something. So we had this bare bones website with a few things for sale. And we'd come in once a week after everything was closed down, and we'd bring all our own bags, labels, boxes, stickers. We had a printer to print out our shipping labels, and we would buy coffee 1 bag at a time, which is incredibly obnoxious to do for the importers and exporters, but they did it for us because, we had people were willing to help us out. And we're roasting these small amounts of coffee, bagging everything up ourselves, handwriting labels, dropping everything off at the post office the next day. And that was our existence for a long time, almost a year of just doing this weird, strange web store. And then after that, we're, starting to look for spaces, and I'm working part-time at this point and at this bake shop. And I talked to the woman who owned the bake shop. They're closed on Monday because they have a prep day. I'm like, hey, what would it be like if we came in on Monday and did a little pop-up? We could bring in our own coffee and just kind of run our service. Would you be willing to make us some pastries? I know you don't usually bake on Monday, but is that something you could do? And they're like, yeah, that's great. You totally do that. So, now we have a podcast and a web store, and now we're doing pop-ups on Mondays. And then we're starting to look for and build our first space. So it's this little drip, one step at a time. What's the most feasible step that we could take? Because we don't have any money. We have a very small amount of money. We don't have a ton of flexibility. We didn't have investors to be like, here's a $500,000 check or $1 million check to get you going. And I think that scales to whatever you're doing. It's not like what you're doing doesn't count until you get to this place where, oh my gosh, now we have our first location. What we were doing the whole time counted. So have a conversation, writing, sharing, thinking about where it fits into your life. And not everything has to be a business. If you have a gift to share with someone, that gift could be a conversation. It could be a blog or a podcast that you write simply to share ideas. You don't have to monetize everything. That's not, the idea of having a hobby is also lost in this day and age. I have a friend who writes these amazing screenplays. He's so good with words and so good with character development, and he writes all these skits, and they just kind of sit there. And he always talks about filming one. I'm like, dude, we got to film one of these. He's like, well, no, it's hard to get it pitched to, and no one's going to pick it up, and I got to go through this whole process, and it's really competitive. And I'm like, dude, forget about all that. Let's just make it exist. Let's just shoot a pilot and just do it just to do it and put it out there. Get it out in the world, because I know how I feel about this stuff. If I watched that, I would be entertained, and I wouldn't really care that it wasn't a Netflix special or something I could watch on HBO Max. There's so many people doing creative things out there that don't have a ton of gear or ton of backing, and it doesn't take away from their art. It doesn't take away from their impact that they have on other people. But you got to get past that initial block of, the thing that you make the first time is not going to match up with the vision that's in your head. And that's okay too. Like preparing yourself for it to not suck, but not be what you see, that's where that's the beauty of the journey. But yeah, all that distilled down to, what's the best first step that makes sense to you, something that you could do, that you would do, and then do it, even if it doesn't feel super grand.
I love it. Chris, where should we send people to find you and your work?
Yeah. If you're interested in the coffee situation, catandcloud.com. There's coffee. Our podcast is there. You can read about us. I write a weekly blog that's this combination of ideas that I have while I'm at work, plus things that are personally relevant to me. It's a lot about what we just talked about, inspiring people to take action on their ideas. That's the whole premise of the blog, sharing your gifts with the world. You can find that at realchrisbaca.com. I have a newsletter that you can subscribe to, which I know there's like everybody has a newsletter. I can't imagine
For
there's
sure.
one more thing you would want to subscribe to, but if you get a kick out of it, it's my favorite project, and that it feels very personal to me, and I just love doing it. So if you go there, you'll be able to see that and everything else that's associated with that. Instagram, YouTube, it's all baked into there. So that's all you need to know. catandcloud.com, realchrisbaca.com, and that's where I exist.
I'm a subscriber to your newsletter, so I can
Cool.
attest to the fact that it's worth it. It's short stuff. It fits right into people's schedule. So don't let that hold you back. You can afford to subscribe to another newsletter. So,
appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to do it again. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.